Subscribe for the full story.
My daughter thought I buried my money in the backyard. She dug for weeks, but I'd already moved it to a Swiss bank. The glint of the shovel hitting something hard wasn't the sound of treasure, but the sound of a daughter's folly. Her eyes, usually bright with the promise of a good time, were now alight with a desperate, feverish gleam. She was convinced, utterly convinced, that I, her dear old dad, had buried my fortune somewhere beneath the prize-winning petunias. Hey everyone! If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below. My backyard, truth be told, was quite a sight. Not because of any buried riches, mind you, but because of the sheer dedication my wife, Eleanor, put into it. Eleanor had a green thumb, the likes of which I'd never seen. Our garden wasn't just a patch of dirt. It was a meticulously curated symphony of color and scent. Rose bushes climbed the trellis, their blooms a deep, velvety red. Lavender bushes lined the winding path, their fragrance a calming balm after a long day. And then there were the petunias. Oh, the petunias. Eleanor treated them like royalty, fussing over their soil, ensuring they got just the right amount of sun and water. They were plump, vibrant, and, frankly, a little ostentatious. And this, my friends, was where Sarah, my beloved daughter, decided to unleash her excavation plans. Sarah. Bless her heart. Sarah was a force of nature, but not in the way Eleanor cultivated the garden. Sarah's nature was more akin to a sudden, unexpected hurricane. She was always chasing the next big thing, the next get-rich-quick scheme, the next shortcut to success. When she wasn't dabbling in cryptocurrency that plummeted faster than a dropped anchor, she was investing in artisanal pickle futures. You get the picture. She had a boundless enthusiasm, which I admired, but a remarkably shallow understanding of how wealth was actually built and, more importantly, preserved. The whole obsession started innocently enough, or as innocently as anything involving Sarah and money ever does. She'd come over for dinner one Tuesday evening, looking particularly flustered. Her usual bubbly demeanor was replaced by a furrowed brow and a slight tremor in her voice. "Dad," she'd begun, picking at her roast chicken, "I'm in a bit of a pickle." "Oh?" I'd replied, taking a sip of my wine. Eleanor always made the best roast chicken, a steady, reliable comfort, much like my own financial strategy. "What kind of pickle this time?" She'd sighed, a dramatic, drawn-out sound that meant she was about to ask for something significant. It's about that investment I made. The one in those designer dog sweaters. I'd blinked. The ones with the tiny sequined collars? "Yes, those!" Her voice rose. Apparently the market for luxury canine knitwear has contracted. I resisted the urge to chuckle. Contracted? It's just not doing well, Dad. And I need some capital. Fast. She'd leaned forward, her eyes darting around as if the walls themselves might be listening. "I was thinking, you've always been so good with money, and you've got a lot." This was the preamble, the careful dance before the direct ask. I knew it well. "And?" I prompted, my gaze steady. "And I was wondering," she'd lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, "if maybe you had some of it, somewhere accessible. Something you could loan me, or, gift me, just a little bit to tide me over." I'd smiled. "Sarah, my dear, my funds are strategically allocated." "Strategically allocated," she'd echoed, her brow now more deeply furrowed. "What does that even mean? Are they stuck in some weird fund that takes ages to get out of?" "Something like that," I'd said, enjoying the slight unease I was cultivating. That night, however, something shifted. Sarah's desperation was palpable. It wasn't just a fleeting whim, it was a genuine need, and as I lay in bed, listening to Eleanor's gentle snores, a thought, unbidden and rather amusing, began to form. Sarah had always been an imaginative child. When she was little, she'd believed our house was haunted by a friendly ghost who liked to rearrange her socks. Her imagination, while often misplaced, was potent. The next morning, I was out in the garden, enjoying my coffee, when Sarah arrived, not for dinner this time, but with a rather large, very new-looking shovel. She was wearing overalls that looked suspiciously clean and a determined glint in her eye. "Morning, Dad," she chirped, her voice a little too bright. "Sarah," I'd replied, raising my mug, "to what do I owe the pleasure and the industrial-grade digging equipment?" She'd waved the shovel vaguely. "Just getting some exercise. Fresh air, you know." She'd then casually walk towards the most densely planted section of Eleanor's petunia patch. My eyebrows had climbed my forehead. "Exercise in Eleanor's prize-winning petunias. Sarah, you might want to reconsider your cardio routine." Eleanor is rather protective of her blooms. She just grinned, a wide conspiratorial grin that did nothing to allay my suspicions. "Don't worry, Dad, I'll be careful. I'm just looking for something." And then, with a surprising amount of force, she'd plunged the shovel into the soft, dark earth, right between a particularly magnificent fuchsia petunia and a vibrant purple one. The sound of the shovel cutting through the soil, a sound that would normally be associated with gardening, now carried a new, unsettling resonance. It was the sound of her starting her misguided quest. I watched, a slow smile spreading across my face as she began to dig, and dig, and dig. The petunias, those proud, flamboyant flowers, were quickly becoming collateral damage in Sarah's frantic search for buried treasure. The dig began in earnest. Sarah, fueled by a potent blend of misguided hope and a desperate need for capital, was relentless. The earth flew, dark and rich, staining her overalls and her determined face. Eleanor's meticulously tended petunias, once a riot of color, were now a chaotic mess of uprooted stems and disturbed soil. Each thud of the shovel against a hidden root or a buried stone was met with a frustrated grunt or a renewed burst of digging. I watched from the porch, my coffee growing cold, a quiet amusement blooming within me. It wasn't schadenfreude, not entirely. It was more the wry observation of a father watching his daughter chase a phantom, a shadow of his own making. I'd been deliberately vague about the location of my finances, a vague, strategically allocated being the only crumb of information I'd offered. And Sarah, with her penchant for the dramatic and her conviction that I was hiding something, had filled in the blanks with the most logical, if entirely incorrect, conclusion: buried treasure. Weeks turned into a month. The initial frenzy of digging, which had been confined to a single, albeit significant, quadrant of the garden, began to spread. Sarah, having found nothing but earthworms and a surprising number of discarded snail shells, had broadened her search. She'd moved onto the rose bushes, the lavender border, even the patch of stubborn, non-flowering ferns that Eleanor insisted on keeping for sentimental reasons. The garden, once a testament to Eleanor's dedication, was transforming into a war zone of overturned earth and trampled foliage. Eleanor, bless her patient soul, was initially bewildered. She'd seen Sarah's efforts, of course. She'd witnessed the gradual destruction of her horticultural masterpiece with a growing unease that she tried, valiantly, to mask with polite inquiries. "Sarah, dear," she'd said one afternoon, her voice strained as she surveyed a particularly gaping hole near the prize-winning Queen Elizabeth rose, "are you looking for something in particular?" Sarah, sweating and covered in dirt, had paused, the shovel in her hand. Yeah, Aunt Eleanor. Just trying to find a really good spot to plant some new bulbs. For spring." Eleanor had raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Bulbs? In October? And with that much enthusiasm?" "Well, Sarah had stammered, wiping her brow with a grubby sleeve. "I'm just really excited about the future of this garden." Eleanor had merely nodded, a tight little smile on her lips, and retreated indoors, muttering something about needing to check on the hydrangeas. My own role in this charade was a carefully cultivated one. I offered no encouragement, no discouragement. I simply observed, a silent, amused spectator. When Sarah would emerge from her digging sessions, exhausted and disheartened, she'd often find me on the porch, reading the newspaper. "Still no luck, Dad," she'd sigh, sinking onto a wicker chair. "It's like the money just vanished." "Perhaps it found a more comfortable climate," I'd reply, turning a page, my eyes crinkling at the corners. "A comfortable climate? What are you talking about?" "Just an observation, dear. Some assets prefer certain environments for optimal growth and preservation." She'd stare at me, her brow furrowed in that familiar pattern. "You're being awfully cryptic, Dad." "Am I?" I'd ask innocently, the corners of my mouth twitching. I thought I was being quite clear. My financial portfolio is, as I mentioned, strategically allocated. The word allocated seemed to be the sticking point. It was a word that, to Sarah's mind, was synonymous with hidden in plain sight, or perhaps buried by a genius father who clearly anticipated my financial follies. The turning point, or perhaps the escalation, came when Sarah unearthed a small, tarnished tin box. Her eyes, already wide with a desperate hope, nearly popped out of her head. She dropped her shovel, her hands trembling as she reached for it. I braced myself, anticipating the inevitable disappointment. She fumbled with the clasp, her breath catching in her throat. When it finally sprang open, it revealed not piles of gold coins or bundles of crisp banknotes, but a collection of old, faded photographs and a few childhood trinkets. There was a tiny, chipped porcelain horse, a silver locket I'd given Eleanor on their first anniversary, and a handful of smooth gray pebbles from a beach we'd visited when Sarah was small. Sarah stared at the contents, her face falling like a deflated balloon. The frenzied energy drained from her. She picked up the locket, turning it over in her fingers. These are just old things," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Indeed they are," I said, finally setting down my newspaper. I stood and walked over to her, placing a hand on her dirt-streaked shoulder. "Sentimental value, Sarah. That's a different kind of wealth, wouldn't you agree?" She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But Dad, I thought you were hiding your money." "I needed it." "I am hiding my money, Sarah," I said softly, a genuine smile now gracing my lips. "But not in the garden." She blinked, confusion replacing her despair. "Then where?" "In a place where it is safe, secure, and subject to very little fluctuation in value," I said. "A place that values discretion and stability above all else." She waited, her gaze fixed on my face, sensing a shift in the narrative. "Sarah, my dear," I continued, my voice taking on a more conversational tone, "you're right, I am very good with money. And you're right, I have a lot of it. But the world of finance, particularly for those of us who prefer a steady hand and a long-term view, isn't about dramatic gestures or buried treasures. It's about careful planning, diversification, and yes, strategic allocation." I paused, letting the words sink in. The shovel lay forgotten in the dirt beside her. The petunias, casualties of her quest, drooped in their disturbed beds. "When you asked me about your investments, about needing capital, I realized something," I said. "You have a creative approach to finance, Sarah. And while I admire your spirit, your methods are a touch volatile. So I thought, why not give you a tangible lesson?" Her eyes narrowed. "A lesson?" "Precisely. A lesson in the futility of searching for buried treasure when the real treasure is carefully managed elsewhere. A lesson in the importance of a solid foundation rather than frantic digging." She looked around at the ravaged garden, then back at me, a flicker of understanding dawning in her eyes. "So all this digging, it was just you letting me do it?" "Essentially," I confirmed. "I watched you dig, hoping you'd realize that the earth beneath our feet, while beautiful, is not the repository for my carefully cultivated assets." "But where's since it?" she pressed, the ingrained need for concrete answers kicking in. I leaned in slightly, a conspiratorial glint in my own eye, mirroring hers from weeks past. "You mentioned a comfortable climate, remember? A place for optimal growth and preservation?" She nodded slowly, her gaze sharpening. "Well, Sarah," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, My wealth is currently enjoying the crisp, efficient, and highly secure climate of a Swiss bank, not under Eleanor's petunias. The revelation hung in the air, a stark contrast to the muddy reality of the garden. Sarah stared at me, then down at the tin box, then back at the dug-up earth. The manic energy that had driven her for weeks seemed to drain away, replaced by a dawning, almost comical realization. She let out a shaky laugh, a sound that was more of a bewildered exhale. "A Swiss bank? You buried your money in Switzerland?" "Not buried, my dear, deposited. Professionally managed, and far, far away from any shovel-wielding daughters, however well-intentioned." She dropped the locket back into the tin box with a clatter. "So all those weeks, all that digging the petunias, it was all for nothing?" "Not entirely for nothing," I corrected gently. "You got some exercise. You learned a valuable lesson about the nature of true wealth and its preservation. And Eleanor, while understandably displeased with the state of her garden, will eventually understand. And I added, a genuine warmth spreading through me, got to witness a rather amusing spectacle." She looked at the mess around her, a self-deprecating smile finally touching her lips. I suppose you're right. I was so convinced you had some secret stash, some pirate treasure." "My dear Sarah," I said, pulling her into a hug, the scent of damp earth clinging to her. "The greatest treasures are rarely found by digging blindly. They are built, nurtured, and protected with foresight and a strategic mind. And sometimes," I added, pulling back and giving her a playful nudge, "they're simply stored in a very safe, very distant vault." She leaned her head on my shoulder, the fight gone out of her. "So no more digging, then?" "No more digging," I confirmed. "Now, how about we find Eleanor and apologize profusely? And perhaps offer our services to help her salvage what's left of her prize-winning petunias. I suspect my own expertise in strategic financial allocation might extend to strategic horticultural restoration." Sarah let out a full-blown laugh this time, a genuine, unburdened sound. "Dad, you're impossible." "But I'm also your father," I reminded her, smiling. "And I've taught you a lesson, haven't I? The real treasure isn't buried, it's banked. And it's a lot more secure when it's not subject to the whims of artisanal pickle futures or designer dog sweaters." Quote. As we walked back towards the house, leaving the wreckage of the garden behind us, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of satisfaction. Sarah was a whirlwind, a dreamer, a risk-taker. She was everything I wasn't, and I admired that in her. But she needed to understand that the foundations of financial security weren't built on hope and shovels, but on discipline and discernment. And sometimes, the most effective lesson was delivered not through lectures, but through a week's worth of enthusiastic, albeit misguided, digging. The Swiss bank account was doing just fine, a silent testament to my own strategic allocation, while Sarah, in her own uniquely chaotic way, had just received a very expensive and very earthy financial education. The petunias would regrow. Sarah's understanding of wealth, however, had just undergone a significant and hopefully permanent recalibration. The afternoon air, usually fragrant with Eleanor's blooming roses, now carried a distinct aroma of disturbed earth and something vaguely like defeat. Sarah, having accepted the futility of her horticultural treasure hunt, sat on the porch steps, a faint sheen of sweat still on her brow. The tin box, open and empty save for its faded memories, lay beside her. Eleanor, with a sigh that seemed to emanate from the very roots of her beleaguered garden, was inside, likely engaged in a silent communion with her surviving hydrangeas. My own amusement had softened, replaced by a quiet affection for my impulsive daughter. "So," I began, my voice gentle, "the legendary hoard remains elusive." Sarah kicked at a loose pebble with the toe of her dirt-caked boot. "Elusive is putting it mildly, Dad. It's more like non-existent." She looked up at me, a ghost of her earlier intensity still in her eyes. "But you were so vague, strategically allocated. It sounded like a coded message, like you'd hidden it somewhere only I would understand." "And you understood it as, underground, in a place only a determined daughter with a shovel could find. I raised an eyebrow, a familiar twinkle in my eye. "Well, yes, it was the most logical conclusion," she protested, though a hint of a smile played on her lips. "I mean, what else could it mean?" "It could mean, Sarah," I said, leaning forward, "that my financial strategy involves diversification, offshore accounts, and a healthy dose of fiscal prudence. Not exactly the stuff of pirate lore, is it?" She let out another shaky laugh. "Apparently not. I imagined you, a masterful financial strategist, burying your riches like a secret pirate captain, leaving clues only for your most worthy descendant." "My dear Sarah," I countered, my tone softening, "the greatest treasures are not unearthed, they are cultivated. And sometimes, the most effective cultivation happens in soil that's far more stable than that of a suburban garden. Think of it as planting a seed in fertile ground, rather than digging for a buried bulb. One grows, the other can cause significant damage to prize-winning roses." She winced slightly at the mention of the Queen Elizabeth. "I really am sorry about the garden, Dad, and Aunt Eleanor." "She'll forgive you," I assured her. "Eleanor has a remarkable capacity for forgiveness, especially when presented with genuine remorse and a well-timed offer to help replant." I paused, considering her. "Speaking of which, perhaps your newfound understanding of strategic allocation can be applied to a more traditional form of wealth creation. Something that doesn't involve disturbing precious flora." Her brow furrowed again. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I continued, my gaze drifting to the carefully manicured lawn that bordered the ravaged flower beds, "that your enthusiasm and drive are undeniable. Those are valuable assets in themselves. It's simply a matter of channeling them into endeavors that yield tangible, sustainable returns, rather than speculative excavation." Quote, "So you're saying I should get a real job?" she asked, a touch of playful exasperation in her voice. "Not necessarily a real job, as you put it," I clarified, "but perhaps a venture that aligns with your adventurous spirit, but with a slightly more predictable outcome. Have you ever considered investing in something tangible? Something that has inherent value, rather than the theoretical value of hidden cash?" She pondered this for a moment. "Like what? Real estate? Art?" "Those are possibilities, certainly," I conceded. "But I was thinking of something perhaps more immediate, something that requires the same kind of meticulous observation you displayed while digging, but applied to a different kind of market." A flicker of genuine curiosity ignited in her eyes. "What are you talking about, Dad?" "Your initial conviction, Sarah, that I was hiding something valuable was not entirely misplaced. I shmam good with money, and I've learned that sometimes the most profitable ventures are those that are overlooked or undervalued by the mainstream." I stood up, extending a hand to help her. "Come, let's go inside. Eleanor is probably ready for a cup of tea, and I have a proposition for you that might just satisfy your craving for strategic acquisition." Inside, the air was still and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy that had permeated the garden. Eleanor, having meticulously straightened her apron, sat at the kitchen table, a half-eaten biscuit resting on her saucer. She looked up as we entered, her expression a mixture of weariness and polite expectation. "Well, dear," she said, her voice still a little strained, "I suppose the great treasure hunt has concluded." "Indeed it has, Aunt Eleanor," Sarah replied, a sheepish grin spreading across her face. "And I owe you a profound apology for the state of your petunias. I'll do everything I can to help fix it." Eleanor offered a small, forgiving smile. "It's quite all right, Sarah. A little soil never hurt anyone, though I do believe my prize-winning Queen Elizabeth might hold a grudge for a while. I'll personally escort her to a therapist," Sarah quipped, and Eleanor actually chuckled. I sat down beside them, pouring myself a fresh cup of coffee. "Sarah," I began, my voice taking on a more serious tone, "you were looking for capital, for investment opportunities. And while your methods were unconventional, your underlying intent was sound." Sarah watched me, her attention fully captured. "You mentioned that you admire my financial acumen," I continued, "and you're right. I have a knack for identifying undervalued assets and seeing potential where others don't. What if I were to offer you an opportunity to learn that skill firsthand? Not by digging, but by observing, by analyzing, by strategically allocating your own resources. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. You want to teach me about investing? Precisely, I confirmed, and not just about stocks and bonds. I'm talking about real-world value, tangible assets that can appreciate over time. For instance, I said, gesturing towards the window that overlooked the slightly less ravaged section of the garden, you have a discerning eye. You notice the potential for treasure in the earth. What if you could apply that same discernment to identifying potential in, say, emerging markets or overlooked industries? Sarah leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. I don't know, Dad. I always thought finance was dry. All numbers and spreadsheets. It can be, if approached passively, I agreed, but it can also be a dynamic, fascinating game of strategy and foresight. And for someone with your inherent drive, it can be incredibly rewarding. Imagine finding a hidden gem in the market, much like you were convinced I had hidden one in the garden. The thrill of the discovery, the satisfaction of seeing it grow, of knowing you were the one who recognized its true value. I reached for the tin box which Sarah had unconsciously placed on the table. I opened it again, picking up the tarnished silver locket. This locket, for example. To most, it's just old silver. But to Eleanor, it represents a significant emotional investment. It's a tangible reminder of a cherished memory. In a way, that's what I invest in. Things that have intrinsic value, whether that value is measured in dollars, sentiment, or potential. And I'm confident that you have the capacity to develop that same vision. Sarah picked up the chipped porcelain horse, tracing its delicate features with her fingertip. So, you're not just going to give me money? I smiled. Not in the way you were hoping, no. But I am offering you something far more valuable. The knowledge and the opportunity to generate your own wealth, to build your own financial empire, however modest or grand it may be. Think of it as a long-term investment in you. A strategically allocated investment in my daughter's future prosperity. She looked at the locket, then at the porcelain horse, and finally her gaze settled on me. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. So if I can learn to invest wisely and help Eleanor replant her garden, you'll guide me? I will, I promised. We'll start with the basics. We'll analyze companies. We'll explore different investment vehicles. And yes, we'll even revisit the concept of strategic allocation in its true financial sense. I winked. It might even be more exciting than digging for buried gold, and considerably less disruptive to the local ecosystem. Eleanor, who had been quietly sipping her tea, cleared her throat. And perhaps, Sarah, after your financial tutelage, you could lend me your enthusiastic spirit for garden restoration. I have a rather ambitious plan for a new herb garden, but my enthusiasm wanes when it involves digging. Sarah laughed, a bright, clear sound. I'd love to, Aunt Eleanor. I think I've learned that sometimes the best way to create value is to nurture what's already there. As we sat there, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the kitchen, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The misguided treasure hunt had, in its own way, led to a genuine discovery. The realization that the most valuable treasures are often those we build ourselves, through knowledge, effort, and a touch of strategic vision. Sarah, my whirlwind daughter, was finally ready to trade her shovel for a financial portfolio, and I was eager to be her guide. The petunias would eventually bloom again, and perhaps so too would Sarah's financial acumen, cultivated not by the promise of buried gold, but by the wisdom of strategic allocation and the enduring value of tangible assets. The Swiss bank account remained a secret, a quiet testament to my own financial prudence, but the lessons I would impart to Sarah would be far more impactful, forging a different kind of wealth, one built on understanding and foresight, rather than a desperate, dirt-stained quest. And who knew, perhaps with her unique brand of determination, she'd one day manage her own Swiss bank account, a testament to the lessons learned, not in a garden, but in the fertile fields of financial literacy. The adventure, I suspected, was just beginning. The kitchen table, a battlefield of half-eaten biscuits and spilled tea, transformed into a classroom. Sarah, her initial frustration still a faint blush on her cheeks, sat opposite me, a notepad and pen clutched in her hand. Eleanor, having declared her aversion to further horticultural discussions, had retreated to her study with a well-worn gardening manual, leaving us to our new endeavor. "So, Dad," Sarah began, her voice still carrying a hint of the dramatic flair that had led her on her recent wild goose chase, "where do we begin this grand journey into the dazzling world of finance?" I smiled, my coffee cup warm in my hands. "We begin, my dear Sarah, with a fundamental shift in perspective. You were looking for something hidden, something already there, waiting to be unearthed. True wealth creation isn't about finding buried treasure, it's about cultivating it." "Cultivating it? Like roses?" she asked, a playful glint in her eyes. "Precisely," I affirmed, "but instead of sunlight and water, we'll be using knowledge and strategy. The first principle is understanding value. What makes something valuable? It's not always about what it appears to be on the surface. Think about this locket. I picked it up. It's worn silver catching the light. To you, it's a relic, a potential clue. To Eleanor, it's a memory, a tangible piece of her past. Its value is multifaceted. In finance, we look for assets that have intrinsic value, whether that's economic, technological, or even sentimental, if that sentiment translates into demand. So it's not just about the numbers, she pressed, her brow furrowed in concentration. The numbers are the language, Sarah. They tell a story. But you have to understand what the story means. For example, you were convinced I had, strategically allocated, my wealth. In your mind, that meant a hidden hoard. In reality, my strategic allocation involved diversifying my investments across various sectors, utilizing tax-efficient accounts, and maintaining a healthy liquidity buffer. It was about calculated risk and long-term growth, not a pirate's chest. I gestured to her notepad. "Let's start with the basics. What do you know about companies?" They make things," she ventured, her uncertainty evident. "They do, but they also innovate, they provide services, they employ people, and they generate profits. Our goal is to identify companies that are well-managed, have a strong competitive advantage, and are poised for growth. This isn't about luck. It's about diligent research and informed decision-making." Over the next few weeks, the kitchen table became our investment boardroom. We started with the fundamentals of the stock market, exploring concepts like supply and demand, market capitalization, and dividends. Sarah, to her credit, absorbed the information like a sponge. Her initial romanticized notions of finance were slowly being replaced by a more pragmatic understanding, though the thrill of a potential discovery still lingered in her eyes. "So, if I invest in, say, a company that makes those fancy lawn sprinklers Eleanor loves," she mused, tracing the outline of a company logo on a printed report, "and their sprinklers are better than everyone else's, then their stock price will go up?" "Potentially," I confirmed. "If their innovation leads to increased sales and profitability, and if the market recognizes that potential, then yes, the stock price is likely to rise." But it's not as simple as that. We also have to consider competition, economic conditions, and the overall market sentiment. It's a complex ecosystem. One afternoon, as we were analyzing a tech company's quarterly earnings report, Sarah suddenly exclaimed, "Wait a minute, this company, they're investing heavily in research and development for that new energy-efficient battery technology you were telling me about. And their sales are actually down this quarter because they're retooling their factories." I looked at her, surprised by her astute observation. That's correct. Most people would see the declining sales and sell their shares. But what does that tell you about the company's future prospects? She tapped her pen against her chin, her gaze fixed on the report. It tells me they're thinking long-term. They're willing to sacrifice short-term profits for future growth. So even though their stock might be down now, it could be a good time to buy, right? Because the potential is there? Exactly, I said, feeling a surge of pride. You're beginning to see it. That's the essence of identifying undervalued assets. It requires foresight, a willingness to look beyond the immediate fluctuations, and a conviction in the underlying value. Our lessons weren't confined to the kitchen. We visited local businesses, observing their operations, talking to owners, and understanding the tangible aspects of their value. Sarah's enthusiasm for digging in the dirt was now channeled into digging into balance sheets and market analyses. "You know, Dad," she said one evening as we were leaving a small artisanal bakery we'd been analyzing, "I never realized how much goes into running a business. It's not just about baking bread. It's about sourcing ingredients, managing staff, marketing, logistics. It's a whole ecosystem, just like you said about the stock market. And that understanding is crucial for making informed investment decisions." I replied. "When you invest in a company, you're not just buying a piece of paper. You're investing in its people, its products, its vision. The more you understand the how and why behind a business, the better equipped you are to assess its potential." The conversations extended beyond finance. Sarah began to see the parallels between her own ambitious, if sometimes misguided, pursuits and the strategies employed by successful companies. Her desire to unearth a hidden hoard was akin to a startup's quest for market dominance. Her impulsive excavation was similar to a company making a risky but potentially rewarding expansion. "It's like you're teaching me a different kind of treasure hunt, Dad," she confessed one day, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "Instead of digging for gold, I'm digging for growth. And instead of a shovel, I'm using research and analysis. And the treasure you're seeking," I added, "is not buried cash, but financial security and the power to build something meaningful. It's about creating value, not just discovering it." Meanwhile, Eleanor, though initially reluctant to admit her garden's trauma, had begun to tentatively accept Sarah's offers of assistance. The Queen Elizabeth rosebush, though still somewhat disheveled, had been carefully pruned, and Sarah, armed with new knowledge of soil composition and nutrient needs, gleaned from Eleanor's manuals and a surprisingly helpful online gardening forum, was meticulously helping to replant the displaced petunias. "You know, Dad," Sarah said, her hands still smudged with potting soil, "it's actually quite satisfying, helping things grow. It's a different kind of reward than finding a hidden tin box, but it feels solid, real." "That's because it is, Sarah," I said, watching her gently pat the soil around a newly planted flower. "Nurturing something, watching it flourish, understanding its needs, that's a fundamental human desire. And when you apply that same principle to investing, you're not just chasing a quick buck, you're building something sustainable." Our conversations also delved into the ethical considerations of finance. We discussed responsible investing, the impact of corporate decisions on communities, and the importance of transparency. Sarah, who had a strong sense of fairness, was particularly engaged by these discussions. "So if a company pollutes the environment to increase its profits, even if its stock is doing well, we shouldn't invest in it?" she asked, her voice firm. "That's a complex question, Sarah," I replied. "Some would argue that by investing in such a company, you have the leverage to influence its behavior. Others would say that you shouldn't support unethical practices at all. It's about aligning your investments with your values. And that's a crucial part of building not just wealth, but also a meaningful financial legacy." Quote, "As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's transformation was evident. Her initial impetuousness had been tempered by a growing sense of discipline and strategic thinking. She had opened a small brokerage account, carefully selecting a few companies that she had thoroughly researched and believed in. Her first few trades were cautious, almost tentative, but her understanding of the underlying principles gave her a quiet confidence. "I bought 10 shares of that sustainable energy company," she announced one morning, her eyes bright. "They just released a new solar panel technology that's significantly more efficient than anything on the market. I think this could be a real game changer." I reviewed her purchase with her, offering gentle guidance and feedback. Her choice was well-reasoned, based on her understanding of the technology, the market, and the company's financial health. It was a far cry from her initial treasure hunt, but the same spark of ambition fueled her actions. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch, the scent of roses now mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of freshly turned earth from Eleanor's now thriving garden, Sarah turned to me. "Dad," she began, her voice soft, I think I finally understand what you meant about strategic allocation. It's not about hiding things. It's about planning. It's about making smart choices today for a better tomorrow. I smiled, placing an arm around her shoulder. Exactly, my dear. It's about understanding the true value of things, both tangible and intangible, and then making calculated decisions to cultivate that value over time. It's about planting seeds, nurturing them, and trusting the process. And sometimes, she added, a playful grin returning, that process involves a bit of diligent digging, even if it's just through financial reports. Eleanor emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron, a contented smile on her face. "The hydrangeas are looking positively resplendent, Sarah," she said, "and those petunias have never been so vibrant." Sarah beamed. "Glad I could help, Aunt Eleanor. I've learned a lot about nurturing things that grow." "Indeed," Eleanor replied, her gaze shifting to me. "And it seems our resident financial wizard has found a new apprentice. I must say, I'm impressed. Though I still suspect there might be a few strategically allocated biscuit crumbs somewhere in the house." We all shared a laugh. The treasure hunt for a mythical hoard had ended, but a far more valuable journey had begun. Sarah was no longer digging for buried riches. She was building her own. The Swiss bank account, with its quiet, efficient management, remained a symbol of my own financial prudence. But the lessons I was imparting to Sarah were about creating a different kind of wealth. Wealth built on understanding, foresight, and the enduring power of cultivating what truly matters. Her adventure was just beginning, and I was proud to be her guide, not with a shovel, but with a spreadsheet and a wealth of experience, planting the seeds for a prosperous future. The petunias would bloom, the roses would continue to scent the air, and Sarah's financial acumen, carefully cultivated, would undoubtedly flourish, a testament to the fact that the most rewarding discoveries are often the ones we create ourselves.
Subscribe for the full story.